We are starting with slide number 35 from the Chapter 17 PowerPoint slides, and we are going to finish up covering erythropoiesis, which is, remember, that is the production of red blood cells or erythrocytes. So, what we need in our diet for erythropoiesis to occur so that we can produce an adequate number of red blood cells, we need amino acids to form the proteins. We need lipids because red blood cells are cells, which means that they are surrounded by a plasma membrane, which of course is composed of phospholipid bilayer. So, and then we need carbohydrates. So in our diet, we really need just a good, well-rounded diet, well-balanced proteins, fats, and healthy fats, and carbs. Again, healthy fats and healthy carbs. But anyway, we need all three of those in our diet, and then we need to get iron in our diet. So iron is transported in the blood, bound to a protein. So when iron is bound to protein, we call it transferrin. Another thing that we need for proper formation of red blood cells is vitamin B12 and folic acid. The lifespan of a red blood cell is 120 days, which of course is 4 months. And red blood cells are anucleate, meaning that they don't have a nucleus. They also don't have other organelles like mitochondria. So they are not able to live long. They're designed so that they can simply transport oxygen as efficiently as possible. Now, what happens when red blood cells break down is the heme components of the red blood cells are the heme is degraded in the liver to the yellow pigment bilirubin. And the liver secretes bilirubin in bile into the intestines, and there it's degraded to urobilinogen, which is transformed into the brown pigment stercobilin that causes the brown pigment in the feces. So we've got urobilins and stercobilins that begin as bilirubin, and those are all components of heme breakdown. Now here we see the life cycle of a red blood cell. So let's blow this up. All right. So starting in the kidney, in step 1, we have low oxygen levels in the blood, hypoxia, stimulate the kidneys to produce EPO or erythropoietin. As the EPO levels rise in the blood, the EPO and the raw materials for erythropoiesis promote the formation of erythrocytes in the red bone marrow. New erythrocytes enter the bloodstream and last about 120 days. And then they age, and aged and damaged red blood cells are engulfed by the macrophages of the spleen, liver, and bone marrow, and then the hemoglobin is broken down. The heme component is broken down into iron and bilirubin, and then the bilirubin is picked up by the liver, and it's used to form bile, which is secreted into the intestine, and then it's broken down into stercobilins. The iron is bound to transferrin, and it's just recycled. Now, the globin portion of hemoglobin is broken down into amino acids, and those are also recycled and used to make new proteins. Now, the raw materials from your diet are made available in the blood to help synthesize erythrocytes. And that's going to be our nutrients, amino acids, carbohydrates, lipids, and then iron, B12, and folic acid. Okay. Now, as far as disorders, red blood cell disorders or erythrocyte disorders, Most are either classified as anemia or polycythemia. With anemia, the blood has an abnormally low oxygen carrying capacity that is too low to support normal metabolism. So anemia is a symptom rather than a disease. And the symptoms that accompany anemia are fatigue, pallor, dyspnea, and chills. And that's just dysregulated sleep, dyspnea, and chills. Okay, so there are 3 groups of anemia based on the cause. There's blood loss, because if you're going to lose blood, you're obviously going to be anemic. And if you're not producing enough red blood cells, you're going to be anemic. Or if too many of your red blood cells are being destroyed, you're going to be anemic. So there's hemorrhagic anemia that can be caused by just because you're bleeding. But internal hemorrhaging would be due to hemorrhoids or bleeding ulcers, could be the cause. Sometimes there's not enough red blood cells being produced, and that can be caused by iron deficiency in your diet, or you're not absorbing iron through your intestines. And this can be caused by hemorrhagic anemia, but it's also by not taking enough iron in through your diet, and also not properly absorbing. Call it malabsorption. The treatment can be iron supplements or even sometimes iron infusions. Okay, now we call it pernicious anemia whenever you have low levels of intrinsic factor. Then intrinsic factor is necessary to absorb vitamin B12. And if you don't absorb vitamin B12, you're not going to produce enough red blood cells. So if you have an autoimmune disease that destroys the stomach mucosa, then you won't produce enough intrinsic factor. And that can cause pernicious anemia. And you can also get it by not having enough vitamin B12 in your diet. So renal anemia is caused by the lack of EPO, and that often accompanies renal disease or kidney disease. The treatment is synthetic EPO. Then you can have aplastic anemia, which comes from the destruction or the inhibition of the red bone marrow, and that can be caused by drugs, chemicals, radiation, or viruses. So anemia in general is going to be reduced oxygen carrying capacity, so not enough oxygen gets to the tissues. And of course, it's going to lead to tissue hypoxia. Another reason or cause for anemia can be that too many red blood cells are being destroyed. Premature lysis of red blood cells, which is referred to as hemolytic anemias, can be caused by incompatible transfusions or infections. And it can be caused by hemoglobin abnormalities. Most of the time, these are genetic. And there are 2 that are pretty well known. They're called thalassemias and sickle cell anemia. Thalassemia is typically found in people of Mediterranean ancestry, such as Greek individuals. In thalassemia, one globin chain is absent or faulty, and the red blood cells are going to be thin and delicate and deficient in hemoglobin. So they won't be able to carry oxygen as well. Now, with sickle cell anemia, which is also genetic, you have a mutated hemoglobin or type of hemoglobin called hemoglobin S, where only one amino acid in the entire molecule is wrong. In 146 amino acids that make up the hemoglobin, only one of them is incorrect. And what is the result of this is that the red blood cells become crescent-shaped when oxygen levels are low. So, for example, if you exercise, and they will rupture easily and block small blood vessels, and that's going to cause a lot of pain and result in poor oxygen delivery. The most common race that tends to have sickle cell anemia are Black people of the African malarial belt and their descendants. The reason is because there is a possible benefit to people who have sickle cell or who even carry the sickle cell trait, even if they're just carriers of the trait and they don't actually have it. When they contract malaria, they'll be resistant to the malaria. So, if individuals get 2 copies of the sickle cell gene, HBS, they can develop sickle cell. If they have only 1 copy, they're going to have milder disease and a better chance of surviving malaria. So that's why it has survived in the population. This is a picture of a normal red blood cell, and and the amino acid sequences. And then if you look at amino acid number 6, it is glutamate. And then in a sickle cell, you see the shape of it, and you see that glutamate is valine in someone who has sickle cell anemia. So polycythemia is an abnormal excess of red blood cells, and that actually increases the thickness of the blood or the blood viscosity, and it causes the blood to blood flow to be reduced. Now, sometimes, and this kind of goes along with athletes who take EPO injections, EPO will lead to increased red blood cell production, but you can also just take red blood cell infusions before an athletic event. And this is particularly going to be an endurance event like a bicycling event or a marathon or triathlon. These are athletes who do these long, many, many hours, these very, very long events that require a lot of stamina. So blood doping can kill you. So can injecting with EPO because it places such a strain on the heart. Now, we're going to move on and talk about white blood cells or leukocytes. And these are the only formed element of the blood that are complete cells that contain their nucleus and their other organelles. White blood cells typically in a healthy individual only make up less than 1% of the total blood volume. They function in defense against disease. That's their main purpose. They usually are in the blood capillaries, but they can leave during an infection by diapedesis, which is when the blood capillaries become leaky and they have more larger openings, so the white blood cells can actually escape the small blood capillaries and move into the tissue spaces. They can either move by amoeboid motion, which is very slow like an amoeba, or by positive chemotaxis, being drawn to certain chemicals that are secreted during an infection. Leukocytosis is diagnosed when you have a white blood cell count of over 11,000 white blood cells per microliter of blood. This increase is a normal response to infection. So typically when you have an infection, you will have leukocytosis. There are 2 major groups of leukocytes. There are 5 total types of leukocytes, but 2 groups. So 3 leukocytes are granulocytes, and these contain visible granules in their cytoplasm. These are neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. And the other 2 are agranulocytes, and they are lymphocytes and monocytes. This is a mnemonic device to help you remember the 5 different leukocytes in your blood. Never let monkeys eat bananas. And that stands for neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. So remember that, never let monkeys eat bananas. And this is a picture that shows you the normal levels, normal percentages of the different leukocytes in your blood. Of the white blood cells, Neutrophils are the most abundant, 50 to 70%. Eosinophils are 2 to 4%. Basophils are usually less than 1%. Lymphocytes are 25 to 45%, and monocytes are 3 to 8%.